Hello, hello. Hi, we are ready to start our session today. I'll let our speakers introduce themselves, but the session title today is Supporting Survivors of Suicide. Thank you.
Dakota Jordan. I'm on now. My name is Dakota Jordan. I work for a organization called Lost and Found, and I coordinate a program called Survivors Joining for Hope that I'm going to talk to you about today. So, there we go. I know how to use technology. So Lost and Found, if you have not heard of us, we're probably most known for our student programming. So we have student programming on college campuses. We have a peer-to-peer mentorship program. We have an advocates program, which is kind of like training you on your mental health, how to be an advocate for yourself, how to be an advocate for others. And then we also have campus chapters, which is kind of like golf club, but for your mental health. So these are the things that we're probably most known for, in the space that we primarily take up is in the campus space, but we also do research and evaluation services. We partner with other nonprofits, other agencies, government contracts, things like that, to provide research and actually data-driven support to the programs that we are doing across the state. We also do education and advocacy services. We do a lot of training, whether that's in the community, other organizations, about prevention, but about mental health in general. And we pride ourselves on being a comprehensive, data-driven, resilience-focused suicide prevention and post-vention nonprofit. The post-vention piece is a little bit newer to us. We've been in prevention for a while, but we took on post-vention when we took on the Survivors Joining for Hope program, which is primarily what we're going to be talking about here. So, the Survivors Joining for Hope program was a program that we inherited, and I'll talk about that, August of this last year, so it's still pretty new to us, and I was brought in at about that same time to run this program. And it is a financial service, or it's a direct service program. We provide financial assistance to families who have lost a loved one to suicide. And we also provide kind of resource connections and referrals. I get a lot of questions. Are you a counselor? Are you doing grief counseling? Are you offering a support group? And we aren't necessarily providing those direct services. We are offering referrals. So I send a lot of people, quite frankly, every single family that we meet with, to the helpline, who provides great support groups in our area and across the state, as well as getting connected in other areas. So this program serves the entire state of South Dakota. We also serve Minnesota and Iowa. We've more so been in the South Dakota piece because obviously we have to get the word out, and that takes a little bit of time and making connections. So it's my job to be connected in every community across the state, even when my feet are, quite frankly, always parked here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and have those connections in the communities of people who do know about other support groups, who do know about other resources and are really plugged into their communities, so that I can plug survivors of loss back into them. So some other information about our program, kind of the logistics of it. We have a cap of assistance at $2,500. We picked $2,500, because we needed to pick a lower number than a higher number sooner rather than later, because when you're giving money away, you got to find someone to give it to you first. So we started with a lower number, but $2,500 will often cover across the state, depending on the funeral home that you are using, will often cover a basic cremation. And so if someone is in a really tight spot, I tell myself that I am not here to tell anyone how to lay their loved ones to rest. Funerals are very expensive, whether they decide to do a basic cremation, if they decide to do services, burials, or things like that. It is not at my will to decide to tell them what to do, but they will have to figure out a way to pay for it, and we can only help with a portion of that, up to $2,500. And I also talked about how we provide emotional support and referrals to families. We say up to a year, where we aren't even a year into our program yet. So we are kind of just figuring out, and I'll talk a little bit about the process as well, about how we stay connected with people when everybody else goes away. You have a lot of friends, you have a lot of family, you have a lot of services that come in after you lose someone, and then eventually the phone calls stop and the meal train stops and things like that stop eventually. And is there still someone who's calling to check in and say, okay, you weren't ready to go to a support group 6 months ago, but maybe now you're ready for it. And I'm the person on the other end of the phone that's hopefully saying, what are you ready for now? So, a little bit of the history of the program. It started as a volunteer run nonprofit by a man named Brad Hurst in 2016. So, if this name does kind of sound familiar to you, it has been around for a while, even though Lost and Found has just taken it over this past year. So, the fun kind of fact about it, Brad Hurst's brother, who died by suicide, was Sergio Joseph Hurst, which is SJH, which is why the program is called Survivors Joining for Hope. It's his initials. And so when we took on the program, that was a good way to continue to honor Brad and the legacy that he had started of his brother. And the entire spirit of the program was to relieve the financial burden. I don't know if anyone has ever dealt with financial assistance programs before, but there is a lot of paperwork and there's a lot of things that you have to prove and a lot of documents. And ultimately what they wanted to create with this program was people are in loss and their minds are foggy, and depending on who you lost, you don't know where the hell those documents are, quite frankly, and how to find them. And we wanted people, and often a funeral is happening very quickly, right? So this is something of getting money to people quickly, helping them with that, not putting them through more pain or turmoil through this process. We are probably a financial assistance program like you've never seen before, for better or worse. I guess I'll let you know. So they provided financial assistance to 37 families kind of in their tenure. And their work provided financial assistance. They provided a support group. We have chosen, as we've carried on, to leave that up to our friends at the helpline and other places in the community. And they also did some prevention programming as well. And so on August 1st of 2020, it became a program of Lost and Found. So I want to walk you through the process here that our people go through. So this really starts with referral partners. So places like the Helpline, places like Front Porch Coalition in Rapid City. Funeral directors is probably our number one referral. We have sent letters out to every single funeral home across the state here in South Dakota to say, if you come across a family who has lost someone to suicide, please send them to us. And we are now currently working on any other space that would be a highly exposed group. So EMTs, coroners, things like that. Wherever someone else would get the news about a suicide before us, we want to know or want to make sure that they know about our program. And so I'm working on that. So after we get that referral, people are either sending them directly to me to call me, or they're sending them directly to our online application. So it is an online application process. It's pretty short, I would say, in the course of applications like this, and they're filling out information about themselves, about the loved one that they lost. They're also filling out obviously some financial information, as well as, are you having issues with any other kind of financial needs in your life? Are you worried about losing your home? Are you worried about losing your job? Do you have access to clothing? I am also a community health worker. I went through the community health worker program, and that is how this program is currently funded. And so we are kind of balancing these specific needs within survivors of suicide loss just to the loss, but then also just their practical logistical needs of life and living. And that's what we kind of assess through the application. So once they fill out that application, I give them a call, kind of walk through that, and maybe ask them some additional questions, get some clarity on their situation. And then once I have that information, I pass it on. We have a committee of about 5 of us that approve and deny these applications kind of based around our parameters. And then once we receive approval or denial based on our parameters, based on taking a vote, then I'm reaching back out to those people and kind of doing what I refer to as their resource call, which this really depends on where they're at in the process, is what I've found. If I'm talking to someone 2 days before the service of their loved one, that second phone call looks a whole lot different than if they had the service for their loved one 6 months ago. We do offer support up to a year after losing someone, so I'm not always catching people in the process of them planning a service or a funeral or things like that. I might be catching them afterwards. And so that is something that I've had to obviously adjust based on where people are at. But I'm calling them to tell them if we are able to give them the financial assistance or not, and then we're moving on to kind of that resource referral piece that I talked about earlier. So are you ready to talk about support groups? Do you have a therapist? Do you want to build a relationship with one? You were worried about losing your housing. Is there something we can do about that? You're not going back to work for however period of time. How are we going to adjust that? And so these are the kind of the questions that we're talking with people and moving through that space. After wait about 3 weeks before I follow up with them, before I start bugging people. People in my life outside of my work would say I'm a really great accountability partner, so maybe that's why they wanted me to do this program, is because I call people to be like, so did you do anything with those things that I gave you a few weeks ago? And so continually, our program really is just about being the ear that continues to call and check in and see if people are doing what they need to, or what they wanted help with. And so we follow up with them at about 6 months. Right now is when we're doing a survey to see if they have any feedback for our program, to tell us anything that we might need to adjust. And then a year is kind of when we would call. And so we have these kind of formal processes, but within that, there's new resources that are popping up every day. And so if there's a new support group in their area, if there's a suicide prevention walk in their area, if there's something else that's going on, because I have people that we've served all across the state, I'll send them a quick email or I'll shoot them a call to say, hey, this might be a good way for you to get connected. I see my job as I am not the person ultimately for these people to rely on. I want to get them connected back into their communities. So if there's anything with the community around them that I can get them connected to, if I can get them connected to more of their peers, then I see that as my job, is to kind of connect. I am the connector. So the impact of our program, and these numbers are a little off because I just got 3 applications actually yesterday. But at the time that I filled this out, we've had 16 total applicants for the financial assistance program. We have supported 15 families with resource referrals and connections. And another thing I should note here, when I say financial assistance program, sometimes people think that that's the only thing that we are. Even if people think that they don't need the financial assistance, they don't want the financial assistance, or even if they don't qualify, like I've had people from California, Utah, places that I'm not super up on what's going on in those communities, they don't fit for our financial assistance program, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to do my due diligence to try and find them resources in their own community to try and get them help and make them one step closer than when they first sent us an email. So resources are available for absolutely anyone that would ever contact us for any reason, but the financial assistance is under different parameters. So 15 families for resource referrals and connections, 12 families actually supported financially, and we have gifted out just over $25,000. Our primary support has been for funeral cremation kind of service expenses, but we have also helped with things like removal of like biohazard items from the home. We've been asked about attorney fees, different things like that. If it has anything that's kind of related to the suicide, any expenses that would come up from that, that would be something that would qualify for assistance. And our first application was September 15th, and our latest was yesterday. So the Survivors Joining for Hope program is directly how we are serving people kind of in this post-vention space, and what has forced Lost and Found to think a little bit bigger on how we kind of close the gap between just doing prevention, and then there's crisis support, which we don't do. That's, again, our friends over at the helpline. And I decided that I wanted to go first because I was like, oh, we're over here, and then you guys are over here. So we're going to let Scott finish it out with all the big stuff. But we want to close that gap. We don't just want to be prevention and then leave people hanging when a suicide actually occurs, because we know that that's still happening even though we're doing a lot of prevention work. And so this program has forced us to move into that space and do more post-vention. And so this is directly working with the families. But what we've realized from that is that these families also go to work. These families also go to school. And those places are also impacted by the suicide, not just the one person that's filling out an application and talking to me on the phone. And so how can we be of more support to that space? Since we are already pretty heavily involved in the campus space, that has been where we have primarily spent our time and where we feel like we have more expertise in that area. So there were actually a handful of suicides at Black Hills campuses this past year. And since we are already plugged into those campuses with our programming, we were asked by them to help them with policy. How do we create a suicide response plan? How do we support our faculty and staff that are ultimately trying to support the students, right? Because the faculty and staff need just as much as support as the students who are going through that loss. And how do we stabilize our campus? And how do we return things to normal and have people continuing to go to class, but also getting the resources that they need at the same time? And so that is some of the space that we are walking into that kind of closes the gap of our prevention services. And then we're also working also to moving into organizational or post-vention. as well. So not necessarily being the crisis response. We don't ever want to be, that's not our expertise, that's not our area to do crisis response, but how can we help with some of that policy development? How can we help them do better? How can we help them provide some of those resources afterwards? And again, it's about connection. We know that we can't do it all ourselves, and so other partners in the community, places like Helpline, places like Front Porch Coalition out in Rapid City, are partners that we rely on to make sure that prevention, crisis support, and postvention can all happen in tandem, because we cannot do it alone. So this QR code for you here in the room will take you to our website, specifically in kind of the postvention space if you wanted to head there. But I also wanted to let you know that you can email me for any handouts. We have kind of created a one-sheet grief resources as a place to start that is universal. So when I work with people, I want to find things for them that are very specific to their needs, specific in their community. But there's lots of little holes on the internet where you can find community, you can find other people to talk to, you can find things to read that are helpful. And so we have developed a one sheet that I always send out to every single family that we support that would say, here are some spots or bunny trails, trailheads, I guess I should say, on the internet that might lead you to other places of connection, things to read, things that might be comforting during this time. So we have those, and we also have some campus best practices as well. So depending on where you're at, organization, campus, or potentially working with survivors themselves, we have some educational handouts that I would have access to. Just give me an email. Oops. I thought it was going to go to, there we go.
Wonderful. Oh, maybe. There we go. All right. Thank you, Dakota. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the survivor of suicide loss services that we at Helpline Center provide. For those that don't know, Helpline Center is a nonprofit that's been around for a couple decades. Janet's back there. She's our head honcho. But we do lots of services in 211, providing resources, referrals. We also started 988 last year, which is where I work as a mental health counselor in answering a crisis lifeline for people who are having thoughts of suicide, people who are struggling with substance use, having anxiety, panic attacks, having some sort of mental disorder that they're working through. Sometimes people just need to talk even. They're having a bad day at work. People can call in to 988, which is 24/7, and talk to us. We also, at the Helpline Center, do help people get connected with volunteering and various other programs. But we're going to look at the survivor of suicide loss services. See if I got this. Yay. All right. Why survivor services are so important. So for every death by suicide, there are 135 people who are exposed to that. Of those, 53 have a short-term disruption in their life, 25 have a major life disruption, and 11 have a devastating effect on their life. Again, those could be family members, mother, brother, father, son, daughter. And those disruptions can be, like I said, devastating. That could be financial, that could be legal, that could be just having a hard time being able to eat, sleep, stay hydrated, wanting to just sit or lay down for days at a time. Some people, they find it hard to go back to work at all. So that's where there's a lot of help that's needed. And for those who have experienced suicide, there's a much greater increase in risk for suicide for those people as well. It says there an example is a 4-fold increase in children when a parent dies by suicide. So roughly 48,000 Americans die by suicide each year, meaning 1 million people suffer those devastating effects, those major disruptions on their life. So that's where we, at the Helpline, get to come in and get to come alongside those within this community. And we know that South Dakota, but specifically here in Sioux Falls, we're not immune. There are suicides that do continue to happen. and people who are continued to be affected. So some of the services that we provide are Surviving After Suicide class, a monthly support group. We have a couple of them, individual and organizational support, and we do some caring cards, and there's a couple other things, and we're going to just go a little bit deeper into each of these. Surviving After Suicide class is something that we do about 3 times a year. It's where those who have experienced the loss of someone by suicide can come along and come with other people. It's a smaller setting. I think sometimes we have maybe 5 or 6, sometimes a little more. But it stays pretty small, and it's a consistent group that you get to walk alongside and go through this guided book and journal by Alan Wolfelt, who's amazing, Understanding Your Suicide Grief, 10 Essential Touchstones to Finding Hope and Healing Your Heart. And it's open to survivors no matter where they're at in their grief journey. So sometimes we have people who join us a couple months after the loss. Sometimes it's 5 or 6 or maybe 10 years later where they're realizing that they haven't actually gone through sort of their emotions, their feelings that they've been holding off for a long time. And sometimes we even have people who do it a couple months after or a year after and then realize a couple years down the road that they feel like they need to go through it again. And that's all right. Another thing that we do are monthly support groups. So we have an in-person support group that meets monthly, and it is the 3rd Thursday of every month at Helpline Center from 7 to 8:30. You can also find some of that information later. We have a website where you can find some of that. We also have a virtual option because we realized it's great that we can support people here in Sioux Falls, but there are a lot of people, especially in rural areas, that don't have a lot of resources, that don't have a lot of support. And so having an option where somebody can Zoom in is wonderful, and it gives them an option to not feel alone wherever they're at. This is more of an informal compared to the class. There's no structure of going through some guided thing. It's really about the survivors that show up, what they need, how their last month has been. You know, sometimes it is they're having birthdays or holidays or anniversaries that they've gone through and they just need to talk through it. Sometimes there's other disruptions that also come up in their life and they need to talk through that. But the support groups are a great way for people to come together and feel like they're not alone. And especially still within our community, there's still taboo, there's still judgment around suicide, and there are people that don't understand or know how to support those who have experienced that loss. And so sometimes it can be very isolating for those who are those survivors. And so when they can come to a group and be with other people who have experienced that same thing, it can bring some relief. It can bring some sense of camaraderie, of bringing out some of that resiliency in people, of letting them know whatever they're feeling, it's okay. Whatever you're going through, it's probably normal. And it's okay for you to find what you need in your grief journey. We also do individual support. So if people are having a death that happened by suicide, people are referred on to us, or they can call us directly, and we'll reach out and we'll talk with them. That could be a couple days after the death. That could be, again, months or even years. It depends on when someone reaches out, and we'll have those one-on-one conversations to see where they're at, how they're handling things, especially early on. Or we'll make sure, are they doing those basic necessities of just trying to survive? Are they eating? Are they hydrating? Are they sleeping? Are they making sure to get a checkup at the doctor? But also getting them some of those resources as well, whether that's counseling, whether that's one of our groups, or if there's a different kind of group that they need, or other kind of resources. We have some of those things available as well that we'll talk with them about and see where they're at and come up with a plan to help them not only in the immediate future, but the more long-term future. We also help businesses, organizations, kind of like Dakota was talking about. We also go in and can support businesses when they've experienced a death by suicide. We can support the staff, we can support the leadership, we can come in and consult with the leadership or management to talk about sort of best practices for supporting that organization, supporting their staff, and also just let them know that there are resources available and that they can always reach out to us if they need it. Some of the other services that we provide, we just created a Healing After Suicide Loss booklet that goes into sort of just surviving after that suicide loss. It has resources, it has some great techniques on just helping them remember to do those basic things that they need to survive. It also has some things on talking with children on suicide. It's talking with others, just again, trying to get through sort of those first weeks and months. We also do caring cards where we reach out to those who are a part of our program, and we send out cards that are created by volunteers who have experienced the loss of someone to suicide themselves. And it can be another connecting way to just let people know that we know what's going on. And even if you're not continuing to connect with us or go to our groups, we're still remembering you. We're still remembering that person that you lost, and we're still here. We also have a survivor resource library at Helpline Center, various books that can help people along their healing journey. Some of those are specifically for children, so sometimes people reach out for those. And then we also just launched a website, which is helplinecenter.org/laws, which looks a little bit like this. So on this, we also have resources, articles. We have a place where people can request support information, which gets sent to our suicide loss and support coordinator, which I'll talk about in a little bit, who will then reach out to them, make the contact, see where they're at, see what's going on. We'll send them a suicide loss packet, again, that has that booklet I was just talking about, but other resources and other things for them to just consider and also know that's available to them. On this website, there's also this In Remembrance, you can see it up there, which is a memorial wall that we have for people who have experienced a death by suicide. They can send in a picture of their loved one, and they can also write a little note to that person. And sometimes you can have multiple people write in or send in pictures for the same person, and we put these on one big wall just to represent all those that have died, but also to hold on to that memory, but also support those survivors to give them a place to remember and to know that they're not the only ones within this community that are struggling, that have experienced that loss. So the Suicide Loss and Support Coordinator, that is not me. That is Wendy Mamer, who is wonderful and compassionate and kind and very, just a great expert at what she does. If you would like to know more information or would like to refer on to this program, you can definitely email her. You can also call that number that is on there. I also wanted to mention, I do work for 988, their Crisis Lifeline, and we're all in the same building. And sometimes Wendy's not there, especially outside of business hours. If someone really needs to talk, if someone really is struggling, especially if they're having thoughts of suicide themselves, we suggest call into 988, give them our number, call with them, and then we can also talk with them about what's going on. We can help come up with a plan to make sure they're safe, but also taking care of themselves. And we'll make sure that they get connected to Wendy as well going forward. All right, go over to Dawn now.
I thought I should have gone first. My name is Dawn Dorman, and my journey, I'm here to talk about my journey with Helpline, which began 33 years ago when I, at the age of 28 years old, came home and my husband was on the floor from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So we took him to the hospital. He lived for 5 days, and then I had to make the decision to shut off the machines. He had struggled for several years with mental health issues and was diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic. And we tried a lot of different things, and unfortunately, none of them worked. And at that time, I really had no clue what I was going to do, and the support system I had wasn't real good. So it was probably a couple years before I made my way to a group, and that was back when it was down by the railroad. And I was just amazed that there was people that understood what I was going through, because back then it was even more taboo than it is now. And through that, I was able, I don't even remember how long I went, but I went for quite a while. And I was able to finally get my way into a counselor and, got the help that I needed. But the fact that, all the signs and things that Scott was talking about, it's, you can't eat, you can't sleep. But it was a safe place to share thoughts, because you kind of think like, well, maybe I'm not quite here, or maybe I'm going crazy. And you felt normal, and other people understood. So that would be enough of a journey. However, in October, well, first of all, God blessed me in 1997 with a baby boy who was my whole life. And we were very close, had a tremendous bond. And even though it wasn't my husband's child, he had a lot of similar characteristics and struggled a lot. Unfortunately, in October of last year, I came home and found my son. And he had died by suicide. Fortunately for me, I knew about the helpline, I knew about the support groups, so I was in a support group within 2 weeks. And I was really glad that I had that knowledge, and he had a 23-year-old girlfriend that had no clue, so I took her with me, and she said to me, "Are you sure we should be going?" "Oh yeah, we should be going." And we just completed last night, actually, the class that Scott was talking about, that Wendy leads, and Wendy is phenomenal, and the reason she's phenomenal for other reasons, but she's also a survivor of suicide. And so she truly understands and empathizes with what people are going through. And it's a curriculum, and it's very helpful because there's journaling involved, and the journaling is kind of hard. But it really takes you through a lot of things that you maybe don't want to think about, but you really need to. And the thing that you really learn is you need, when these thoughts and everything come, a lot of times people want to, okay, well, I can't think about that right now, but you really need to think about it right now because it's so imperative and important. And you need to face it head on, and it's not always pleasant, but it's what you need to do. So, I am eternally grateful for the Helpline Center because they instilled in me the knowledge of what to do. I would not wish, this on anyone, but the blessing for the Helpline Center that I was able to, that I know what I need to do. And so I'm back in counseling now, and I haven't returned to work, and I have PTSD from everything. And because yes, it's different to lose a child than it is a spouse. But yet the similarity of losing someone to suicide is the same. And you can't just, I tried going to support groups that, and that's a great place for some people that have had a loss, but a loss by suicide, I just couldn't relate to the people sitting in that group, like their mother died or, something like that, and by natural causes. And yes, they need to have an outlet too, but this provides a very specific outlet that is so necessary. And there needs to be, like, this class we just went through, and it was 9 weeks long, 6 total strangers who had never met each other. And by the end of last night, we'll be forever bonded, unfortunately. I mean, it's not a group that you want to be in, but it's absolutely necessary that there's a place for that and an outlet to talk about these things. So I'm foreverly grateful to the Helpline Center.
Thank you so much for all of you for sharing your information and your stories. We do have about 20 minutes for questions. If you're joining us online, there's about 90 of you. Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat. Does that qualify? Do we have any questions from our live audience? Any comments?
Thank you very much for being a part of the conference today and sharing about all the great resources. And thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it's impactful for everyone sitting here to hear you share that and just to be brave. October wasn't that long ago when you said that I did the, how to use my fingers.
7 months.
Yeah, to figure out that math. But just, again, like demonstrating the bravery to share that. Like they said, there's 90 folks online who knew you were going to be an internet star today.
Yeah, they didn't tell me there was going to be 90.
And it's recorded and shareable, FY. So I think, again, hearing your story coupled with the resources means a lot. It will maybe provide that opportunity for someone else to reach out and get that help from Helpline and 988. So it's great, again, to hear that and how you went through it. I am going to ask just one question. If you could give just one piece of advice to somebody, a survivor, what would that be?
Go to the Helpline Center. I'm seriously, I mean, but I know that not everyone is able to do that right away. But I would get the resources to someone. Like if I knew someone that happened to, I'd get the resources to them. Because, some days it's like, where is that piece of paper but I knew what I needed to do. But for someone who's never been through it, it's so imperative. And I went through a lot where people are very well intentioned. However, I mean, I had people like at the visitation coming up telling me how their child had tried to commit suicide or and okay, that doesn't help me. Or, oh, well, it's 6 months and shouldn't you be about healed by now? I mean, yeah, I mean, people say things and I don't think they realize what they're saying and well-intentioned. So there needs to be a safe group and you need to be able to be a part of that where you don't have people say stupid things like that. But I've had relatives and friends and things like that. So I have found myself, and I'm also going to a counselor. So I either have to pay someone or I go to the support group. But I don't share very many of my feelings with the people around me because I get responses that are just ludicrous sometimes. And I can't do that. So, and I guess my other suggestion would be if you know someone who's gone through this, just listen to what they have to say. They do not need your opinion. Just listen to what they have to say.
Any advice from our other two speakers?
Mine would be the same. So I am not a survivor of loss myself, which was something that was kind of difficult for me to reckon with coming into a job that is very, I think, peer supported. I am not a stranger to grief. We could talk about that short story later, but I have not lost someone close to me to suicide. And so through that and through our programming, what I have realized by working with people who are survivors of suicide loss is that I'm not trying to be anyone's savior, and the things that I say on the phone is not going to be anyone's saving grace, but I do try and listen as much as I can. When I do that initial phone call, people will just tell me their story without asking, and the most that I can do for them is just listen to that, and then say, okay, we have some other orders of business and I have some other things I can help you with. But ultimately what I try to do is to push people towards a support group, because it is going to be a free option and it is going to get them with other people who understand, even more than me, right? I would like to think that I'm somewhere in between the middle of, I'm not a survivor of loss myself, and I'm not someone who says really stupid things to people out in the community. I would like to think that I'm somewhere in the middle, but I would agree with that. I try to listen and open my ears more than my mouth. And when I do open my mouth, I tell them to go to a support group, because people who have been through that are going to understand you better than anybody else.
Yeah, and I think my words, I mean, a lot of the same. Definitely try to get someone connected where they can. I think also if you're dealing with someone who's lost someone to suicide, Dawn mentioned a little bit earlier about trying to figure out, like, are you going crazy as you're going through the grief journey? That's so common. I wish more people who are grieving could just give themselves grace to feel whatever they're feeling and know that whatever they're experiencing is normal. As long as they're safe, as long as they're continuing to do those basic things to survive, that's what they need to do wherever they're at. That healing journey can come, and it will come on its own. Sometimes you do need support. A lot of times you need support, but you don't need to push it. Sometimes it's okay just to survive and to focus on that, and to know that there are supports available when and if you're ready, whatever that is.
Thank you all for sharing. My question is about kind of that post-vention aspect. We know that we live in a world of stigma. And so just this idea, when you do go to an organization, maybe one person reaches out to you and maybe others aren't wanting to acknowledge that there was a suicide loss, kind of what has been your experience with trying to approach this? Is it just a matter of offering that resources are available, or do you hold an event, or kind of just what that post-vention looks like when you have gone into spaces?
Talk about that? You want me to talk about that?
I'll let you.
Okay. So I would say that we have like one good example. I think I mentioned that we had done some stuff with Black Hills. I am not the staff that's located out there. So Corey Kennedy is actually our staff out in the Black Hills that worked really closely with that university. The person who he was working with was all in. I need all of your help. I want all of the resources. I want to change all the policies. I will work with you directly. Their boss was not having it. Right? We don't have a problem, and we want this problem, which was the suicide, to just go away and act like it never happened. So it is definitely a hard space to wade into, especially when you're dealing with lots of administration and tiers of management and things like that. And there will be people that will say, it happened, let's pretend like it didn't happen and go on, because that's going to be the best for people. There's lots of different methods of communication. Do we tell people? Do we not tell people? Do we have to? And I think workplaces, and especially college campuses, are always worried about liability. If we open our mouth about something, what are we ultimately going to get in trouble for? Which stops a lot of this process. So I think it is a very muddy world to wade in. And like I mentioned, we are just kind of starting to be in that space and figure it out. And I know the helpline is in that space too. There's plenty of this for us to try and work on and wait on together across the state. But what we have also realized is, we can't necessarily walk into organizations and be like, these are the best practices. We want to talk to you about what your campus suicide response plan or what your workplace suicide response plans will be, because they're like, we don't want to talk about that. Right? I don't want to do that. It sometimes makes me think of like when we did tornado drills in school, right? There's like the one time of year that you're doing the tornado drill and you're doing the fire drill, you're preparing for the worst that ultimately no one ever wants to happen. And with suicide, people don't necessarily even really want to do the drills, right? We're willing to do the fire drill and the tornado drill thinking that it's never going to happen to us. So I don't know if any of this is quite frankly answering your question, but it is, it is, there are some people who are on board and really want the help. And some of those people I would say are probably the people who were the closest to the suicide. When it happened in that space, they really want the help. They really want to see things change. And sometimes the other administration that might be held accountable for some of that liability isn't always on the same page, but we're working on it. We are still actively working on that with that campus, and it's been months revising documents, going back and trying to figure out how can we somehow create some sort of change, even if it's a little bit, that if this happens again, we're doing it differently. And we're creating more support for not just the administration, but also for the students, and fumbling our way through that. We did help the school provide a memorial service, which is something that they wanted to do, which is also kind of controversial on if you're supposed to or if you're not to, depending on best practices, depending on what you're reading. But we did help them with that, and also telling students that it occurred, and then providing support and helping, working with the community in Rapid City to make sure that there was counselors and other people that were available to provide that help. So that's my final answer.
We have a question from Lori online. Lori asks, what would you say to someone who has attempted suicide and wants help to overcome those thoughts and feelings of loneliness, hopelessness, depression, low self-esteem, etc.?
That's a big question. I would encourage them to reach out to 988, to reach out to find resources that are going to help you through that. That's incredibly hard, if not impossible, to do on your own. That's where finding people you can trust and that are safe, that you can be open with, that you can talk with, is going to be crucial. And in the immediate term is just making sure that they are safe. And for that, 988 is a great resource because we're 24/7. Someone can always call. You can also text or chat in. That's another thing we do, especially for younger generations. Sometimes that is a little bit more comfortable for people to do. I'd start there and also give yourself some grace. And that's a process that takes time.
No, I was just going to tag on to the talk about postvention. My name is Janet Kiddens. I'm the CEO of the Helpline Center. So I've been in this world for about 25 years. So I've done a lot of postvention work with schools, with businesses, and with individual families. I've made countless visits when there has been a death by suicide. So I wasn't sure what you were asking is, generally, we go in when we're invited to help with that postvention work and help them process those feelings. And so in a workplace, that's going to be different than a school. But oftentimes at a workplace, we're walking alongside. Many companies have EAPs, employee assistance programs. And so that oftentimes we providing individual assistance to the employees as they're experiencing that grief. We're coming in and providing additional support, talking about the specifics of grief and loss to when there's been a suicide, and just offering that expertise and obviously the support groups and the classes that we have that we can support them with. And super critical in a workplace, because whoever that employee, they worked under somebody. So there's always going to be a supervisor or multiple supervisors. And so working with those supervisors is very, very critical because oftentimes they had a close relationship with that employee and they're the ones that are most directly impacted. So you always want to make sure you spend additional time and support with those supervisors as they're kind of processing what happens and what they're feeling, and then how do they communicate and talk with the other staff that are around them with that. So just wanted to add a little bit more onto that.
Thank you. Any other questions from our audience? Any other last comments from our speakers?
Nope.
Well, then, thank you. Let's do a nice applause. Our next session will be at 2:15 in this same room. It will be self-care in a complex world. There are still refreshments and food right outside the door if you'd like to get some more. Thank you.